Hi there, Jesse here with eTrailer. Today we'll be taking a look at and I'll show you how to install the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs on our 2023 Ford F-250. If you're someone who hauls or tows heavy things with your truck, or basically just use your truck as it was supposed to, then you probably noticed that when you are hauling something that your rear end's going to sag down a little bit. That's really going to affect your ride quality and also your braking. The air helper springs will eliminate that sag and give you a much nicer ride. To go into a little bit more detail about why that sagging affects your ride, if you think about it, all of your steering components are on the front of the truck. So whenever it's sagging back, that means there's less weight on the front. That's just going to drastically affect your ride. And also, vehicles, they get a lot of their braking power from the front brakes. So once again, when you're sagging, you're taking weight off of the front tires, and that's going to take away some traction. So adding the air helper springs is going to level that out and make sure that your weight is distributed properly. Another great thing about these air helper springs is that they're adjustable, meaning that if you're completely unloaded, you're not hauling anything, you can still have that factory comfortable ride. But then when you are planning on towing something or you're loading up, you can increase the pressure inside the bags, and that's going to firm up your ride. You have a adjustability from 5 psi to 100 psi, so you can really dial that in to whatever load you're planning on taking with you. One thing to note is that Firestone does recommend that you always have at least 5 psi in the bags, just to ensure that no damage occurs. These air helper springs are going to mount in place of your factory bump stops, which are underneath the truck. So let's get this thing lifted up and we'll take a closer look at it. They're going to replace your factory bump stop, which would normally be located right up here where the top of our airbag is. So Firestone has kind of an intricate bracketing system. They just want to make sure everything is secure. So there's a few steps as far as the install, but I'll show you how that gets done later. But this is just a closer look. The double convoluted bag here, and then your airline fitting is coming out from the top of it. Our airlines run from the top of the airbags through here out to our fittings. Here's where you can get kind of creative wherever you want to mount yours. There's a lot of different options you can do. I opted for using the included bracket. As far as this, it's just a matter of removing the cap, then hooking up an air chuck, which of course means that you would need access to an air compressor, meaning you would have to be at your garage or at a gas station. So sometimes you're planning on taking a trip out to pick up a heavy load or tow something, and you don't really want to ride around with that firm ride the entire time. That's why we'll almost always recommend an onboard air compressor. That way, instead of having to find a gas station that has air or using one in your garage, you would just have to click a button and get your ride set for the load that you plan on hauling. The installation does have quite a few steps as far as getting all the brackets set up correctly, but really it's not something super difficult. If it isn't something that you're looking to do yourself, maybe you don't have the time, the space, or the tools to do so, then feel free to check out our dealer locator. If you are looking to get this installed yourself, then follow along and I'll show you how we got ours set up. Also, if you are installing this yourself, maybe you have some tips or tricks to share with us, please share those below. Our first step of our installation will be to remove our factory bump stops. You might notice that I lowered the spare down and took it off. That's just to give you a better view of what we're working with. You don't necessarily have to do that, but it might help. There are some tight spaces back here that we're working with. I'll just take a 15mm socket and get our 2 nuts holding our bump stop on removed. And we'll set that aside. Now we need to remove the studs that we're holding our bump stop in. So they're just kind of held in by these clips. You should be able to work a screwdriver in there, turn it, and then push it this way. That should come out. So we'll take both of those out. We'll need to take our upper bracket with the 2 nuts welded onto it. Then they include some zip ties that you just put through one of these holes here, then bring out, make sure you're bringing it out the bottom. These are just going to kind of guide us and allow us to pull down on it once we're getting our bolts in. So once you get that, we'll slide it into one of our holes. Let's get that all the way up there. And then we can keep our zip tie hanging down this hole and pull the other one down the other hole. Now we'll take our left side upper brackets. You'll notice there's an L on it. We're working on the driver's side right now. So just make sure you double check, make sure the L is there when you're working on the driver's side. Then the passenger side will say R. And we have some of our flat-headed screws here. These are the 2.5-inch long ones. And our bracket's going to be placed like this with these prongs going towards the frame. Poke our zip ties through those smaller holes next to the holes that we're going to be using. And guide it up there. And it's kind of tricky to hold the bracket up, but you'll also have to pull down on the zip tie so we can get our bolt lined up. And we're just going to get both bolts threaded on for now. Once you have your bolts threaded on, we'll come in with some flush cutters or a knife and cut the tag end. And once we get these tightened down, those zip ties will just be tucked up inside the frame. I'll take a 7/32 hex socket and tighten those down. Now we'll take a torque wrench and torque those two bolts down. If you don't have your own torque wrench, we do have some available here at etrailer, or you could always rent one from your local auto parts store. And the torque specs on all of these will be listed on top of the airbag. I would take a tape measure and just measure from the top of your jounce stopper here to the bottom of our bracket. There's a bunch of numbers in the instructions that's going to allow you to know if you need this spacer or not. Our truck is the trimmer edition, so it sits up a little high, meaning that we do need this spacer, so I'll be adding that on. Just if you measure and you find your numbers below what it says in the instructions, then you won't need to use this, so you can just ignore me installing this. Now we need to assemble our lower bracket. There's going to be two pieces. They'll go together like this. You'll be using these bottom holes with our smaller flathead screws. Slide them through. We're just going to leave these loose for now. So I'll just kind of snug up the nut, because we're going to be test fitting this and we're going to be taking it back down. So let's get those loose for now, and then we're ready to get our bag installed into the bottom of this. We'll take our bag, and as I said, I'm using a spacer. If you're not using the spacer, you'll use these shorter screws to install the bag. But if you are using the spacer, you'll need these longer ones. So just, that one will go right through the bottom there. And your bag has a threaded hole on the bottom of it. Just get that threaded on there. And once again, we'll just kind of hand tighten this. We will need to be able to rotate the bag once we get it up into position. We're ready to lift our assembly we just built into place. Just take note of these holes here. You'll notice a larger hole and a smaller hole. This is where our threaded airline fitting will go. And then the smaller hole is for our alignment pin on top. We're gonna stick with the front set of holes on our setup. So it's kind of swing it around. It's a pretty tight fit. I like to get the lower bracket kind of in place, and then you can squeeze down the airbag until you find that hole that it's going to go in. rotate it. Once you can't rotate it anymore, we know that that alignment pin is lined up with the hole. And now we'll just kind of make sure everything's straight, and I'll take a marker and mark a line down our bag and our spacer and our bracket so we can bring it back down and torque it down. So you can mark anywhere, any location, just whatever seems easiest to identify for you. Just draw a straight line. Make sure you hit the spacer and the bag if you're using a spacer, because those will kind of turn separate from each other. But we'll mark that line and bring it back down. We'll just torque down our bottom bolts. Make sure all your lines are lined up. It may help to kind of get it snug with an electric drill or impact, but once it's snug, nothing should spin. And we'll just torque it down to that specification on top of the airbag. Take our air fitting and install it in the top of the bag. And we'll tighten that down with a 12mm wrench. What we want is to tighten it down until we're not seeing that Loctite. You don't want to over tighten it and end up turning it, because then you'll damage it and you'll end up with a leak. So just tighten it down. We'll get it about as snug as we feel comfortable with, and then once we have everything installed, we can check for leaks later. We can always get a wrench up inside here and tighten it down more if we need to. Now we'll take our nut. This will thread on to the outside of our fitting that we just threaded on. We'll get that on there, and then a 15/16 inch ratcheting wrench will make this easy to snug down. While you're tightening it, just keep double checking to make sure your alignment pin is lined up right. We'll take our leaf spring bracket. This is going to connect to the bottom bracket, and 4 of the not the longest carriage bolts, but the ones slightly shorter than that. So we'll use those longer ones later. So just make sure you got the right ones. This is going to be kind of a tight squeeze. I may just take these 2 out. It's going to line up with these bottom slotted holes on our bottom bracket. And just try to feed these through. Once you get them all lined up, we'll just put some flange nuts on them. Now we need to build our axle brackets. You'll have these L-shaped pieces, 4 of them. They'll connect together like that. And then to connect the 2 of them, we'll use this carriage bolt. And we'll take this underneath our axle here. Have one of those long shouldered carriage bolts, slide that through our inside hole. Try to get this lined up with the hole on our L. Just loosely thread on a nut and do the same thing on the front side. And when you tighten this down, we'll use a 14mm socket, but just work your way back and forth, trying to get it as even as possible. We can torque all of our hardware down. The instructions don't really give an order to torque everything down, but just make sure as you're going along, you might have to kind of work your way back and forth as everything settles. Just make sure that everything looks squared. So we'll get these torqued down, and then we'll just repeat the same process on the passenger side. The only difference being that you will have a heat shield blocking the airbag from the exhaust. So you'll just put that in between the airbag and the top bracket. Ready to get our airlines routed, but first it's a good idea to just figure out where your valves are going to end up. So I'm going to use this bracket that's included with our kit. We'll start off putting a washer on the stem side, and another washer there. We'll top that off with a nut. And I'll tighten that down with a 12mm socket. Doesn't need to be super tight, just so that it doesn't fall out of place. And then with this bracket, we will, I think right here is a good spot. We'll still have clearance to get to our valve stems, and I think it's going to look nice and stealthy. So we'll just throw our bracket up here. They include some large zip ties that we will just slide through your slots here. This is going to hold this onto our hitch. So I'll get these tightened down and then we can start running our lines. For your airline, it'll actually come in one piece and they want you to cut it down the middle, so just stretch it out, find the middle, and then we used airline cutters, but something sharp because you want a very straight cut. That's going to eliminate any leaks. These will come in your kit. Since we're running right up next to the exhaust, I'm going to use them both on this side. On the driver's side, we don't have any heat sources or anything we need to worry about, so I'll just double them up on this one. And those will just be loose for now. Once we get them in position, we can zip tie them down. So for your airline tubing, all you have to do is push it down into that fitting that we installed into the top. Push it down nice and firm, and you should kind of feel it click. That means it's seated. Give it a pull, make sure it's not going to come off. So I'll do that same thing on the driver's side, and then I'll start routing our lines. Here's how I routed our lines. I came through the hole in the hitch here. I put some wire loom on it and just zip tied around it just so it won't rub against that metal there. This is where all of our extra was. I just looped it up. That way if you get any leaks down the road, you'll have extra line to work with, or you might want to switch to maybe a compressor and you would need to relocate some stuff. But with all your slack, just kind of loop it up. And then we routed it up above this because our spare tire would be here. For the passenger side, I just stayed up above the frame there, and then it feeds into the top of our airbag. So I'll get some zip ties around our thermal sleeve there. So that stays. And then as for our driver's side, it was a pretty simple shot. We just went from that hitch, and then I zip tied it up here just so it wouldn't be moving around and maybe contact the shock, and then it plugs into our airbag. So I have our lines ran. Before I get everything cleaned up and zip tied to existing wiring, I'm going to fill up our bags. The instructions recommend 70 psi to test, and then what we'll do is spray all of our connections with some soapy water, and that'll allow us to know if there's any leaks, if there is air coming out. Then we'll see bubbles coming out from those fittings. Now that we've verified that there's no leaks, all that's left is to throw our spare back up if you remove that. Otherwise, that's going to do it for a look at and installation of the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs on our 2023 Ford F-250 Super Duty.